Sarah Martinez stepped out of the dusty military transport vehicle, her boots hitting the scorching concrete of Camp Pendleton with a solid thud. The California sun beat down mercilessly on the sprawling Marine base, creating waves of heat that danced across the horizon like ghostly figures. She adjusted the strap of her gear bag and took a deep breath, tasting the familiar mixture of desert sand and diesel fuel that seemed to permeate every corner of military installations. At 23, Sarah carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned early in life that actions spoke louder than words. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her brown eyes held a determination that had been forged through years of proving herself in a world that constantly questioned her presence. She had graduated from sniper school just 2 weeks ago, ranking second in her class, but she knew that her real test was just beginning. The Marine Corps had been her dream since she was 12 years old, watching her older brother Miguel return from his first deployment with stories that painted pictures of brotherhood, honor, and service that transcended the ordinary world. But Miguel had been killed in action 3 years later, and Sarah's dream had transformed from admiration into something deeper, more personal. She wasn't just here to serve her country. She was here to honor a promise she had made to herself while standing at his graveside. As she walked toward the administrative building to check in, Sarah noticed the stairs. They weren't new to her. She had grown accustomed to being one of the few women in predominantly male environments, starting with her high school JROTC program and continuing through basic training. But there was something different about the looks she was getting here at Camp Pendleton. These weren't just curious glances. They carried weight, judgment, and in some cases, barely concealed hostility. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez emerged from the building, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw her approaching. Rodriguez had been her instructor during advanced marksmanship training, and he was one of the few people in the military who had consistently treated her as an equal rather than an anomaly. "Martinez, good to see you made it in one piece," he called out, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "Ready for the real world?" Sarah nodded, returning his grip with equal strength. "Ready as I'll ever be, Staff Sergeant." "Where am I headed?" Rodriguez's expression grew more serious as he handed her a manila folder. "3rd Battalion, Bravo Company. You'll be working with their reconnaissance unit." He paused, studying her face carefully. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you, Martinez. Bravo Company has a reputation. They're good Marines, some of the best, but they're also old school. Very old school." Sarah opened the folder and scanned the assignment details. The unit was scheduled for deployment to Afghanistan in 6 months, which meant the next half year would be intensive training and preparation. She had expected this, had trained for this, but something in Rodriguez's tone made her stomach tighten with anticipation. "What kind of reputation are we talking about, Staff Sergeant?" Rodriguez glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard, then leaned closer. "Let's just say they've never had a female sniper attached to their unit, and some of them aren't exactly thrilled about being the first. Captain Morrison runs a tight ship, but he's got some NCOs who think women belong anywhere except on the front lines." The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a familiar blanket. She had heard variations of this speech before, from well-meaning instructors and mentors who wanted to prepare her for the challenges ahead. But each time, it reinforced her resolve rather than dampening it. She had not come this far to be deterred by the opinions of men who had never bothered to see past her gender. "I appreciate the heads up, Staff Sergeant, but I didn't join the Marines to make friends. I joined to do a job." Rodriguez smiled grimly. "I know you did, and you're damn good at that job. Just remember that sometimes proving yourself isn't a one-time event. Sometimes you have to do it over and over again." 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself standing outside the barracks that would be her home for the next 6 months. The building was a standard military construction, all sharp angles and utilitarian efficiency. Through the windows, she could see movement inside, the shadowy figures of Marines going about their daily routines. Somewhere in that building were the men she would be working with, training with, and eventually deploying with. As she climbed the steps to the entrance, the door swung open and a tall, broad-shouldered Marine stepped out. He was probably in his early 30s, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of multiple deployments and hard-earned experience. His eyes swept over her dismissively before settling on her face with unconcealed skepticism. "You must be the new addition," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. "I'm Gunnery Sergeant Thompson. You can call me Gunny." Sarah straightened to attention. "Lance Corporal Martinez, Gunny, reporting for assignment." Thompson looked her up and down with the calculating gaze of someone sizing up livestock. So you're the one they're sending us. The brass thinks we need a woman on the team. The way he said woman made it sound like a foreign concept, something distasteful that had been forced upon him against his better judgment. I'm here to serve in whatever capacity the unit needs, Gunny. Thompson snorted. What the unit needs is Marines who can handle the pressure when things get real. This isn't some training exercise, Martinez. Where we're going, people shoot back. Sarah felt her jaw clench slightly, but she kept her voice steady. I understand that, Gunny. I'm prepared for whatever challenges lie ahead. Are you now? Thompson stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly intended to intimidate. Tell me something, Martinez. How many confirmed kills do you have? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sarah knew that her training record spoke for itself, but she also knew that no amount of range time could substitute for actual combat experience. This was the question she had been dreading, because it was the one area where she couldn't let her performance speak for itself. None yet, Gunny. But I graduated second in my class from sniper school, and my marksmanship scores are dash. Thompson cut her off with a dismissive wave. Scores are just numbers, Martinez. Any desk jockey can hit a target on a range. The question is, can you pull that trigger when there's a human being on the other end of your scope? Can you take a life and then go to chow like nothing happened? The challenge in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah could feel other Marines gathering behind the windows, watching this exchange with interest. This was her first test, she realized, and how she handled it would set the tone for everything that followed. I joined the Marines to defend my country and my fellow Marines, Gunny. If that means taking a life to save lives, then yes, I can pull that trigger. Thompson studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he stepped back and gestured toward the building. We'll see about that. Your bunk is on the second floor, third door on the right. Formation is at 0600 tomorrow. Don't be late. As Thompson walked away, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement in the windows above. Several faces quickly disappeared from view, but not before she saw the mixture of curiosity and skepticism in their expressions. She was the newcomer, the outsider, the unknown quantity that had been thrust into their midst. But more than that, she was a woman in a world that many of them still viewed as exclusively male territory. Sarah climbed the stairs to the second floor, her footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. The building had that particular smell of military barracks everywhere, a mixture of cleaning supplies, worn fabric, and the accumulated presence of hundreds of young men living in close quarters. As she found her assigned room, she could hear conversations in the surrounding spaces, voices that grew quieter as she passed. The room was small and spartanly furnished, containing 2 sets of bunk beds, 2 lockers, and a single window that looked out over the training grounds. One of the bunks was clearly occupied, with personal items arranged with military precision on the small nightstand. Sarah chose the bunk opposite and began unpacking her gear, arranging her belongings with the same careful attention to detail that had been drilled into her during basic training. As she worked, she could hear snippets of conversation from the hallway and adjacent rooms. The voices were too low to make out specific words, but the tone was unmistakable: surprise, skepticism, and in some cases, outright hostility. She had expected this reaction, but experiencing it firsthand was different from preparing for it in theory. A soft knock on the doorframe interrupted her unpacking. Sarah looked up to see a young Marine standing in the doorway, probably no more than 19 or 20 years old. He had the lean build and nervous energy of someone relatively new to military life, and his face carried the uncertainty of youth trying to navigate an uncomfortable situation. Lance Corporal Martinez, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I'm Private Johnson. I guess I'm your roommate. Sarah smiled, recognizing the nervousness in his voice. Nice to meet you, Johnson. You can call me Sarah when we're not in formation. Johnson stepped into the room, glancing nervously at the hallway behind him. I just wanted to say, welcome to the unit. Some of the guys are, they're not sure about having a woman in the company. But I think it's pretty cool. My sister always wanted to join the Marines, but our parents wouldn't let her. The simple honesty in his words caught Sarah off guard. After the confrontation with Thompson, Johnson's genuine welcome felt like a small gift. Thanks, Johnson. I appreciate that. And tell your sister that if she still wants to join, there's never been a better time. Johnson grinned, some of his nervousness fading. I will. She's in college now, studying engineering, but she always talks about serving her country somehow. As Johnson settled into his routine of organizing his gear, Sarah continued her own unpacking. The conversation with her young roommate had reminded her that not everyone in the unit would view her presence as an unwelcome intrusion. There would be allies here, people who judged her on her abilities rather than her gender. The challenge would be proving herself to those who had already made up their minds. That evening, Sarah made her way to the mess hall for dinner. The large room was filled with the sound of conversation and the clatter of metal trays on tables. As she moved through the serving line, she could feel eyes following her progress. Some of the looks were simply curious, the natural reaction to seeing someone new in a familiar environment. Others carried more weight, ranging from skeptical evaluation to outright hostility. She found an empty table in a corner of the room and settled down with her tray, using the opportunity to observe the dynamics of the unit. The Marines had naturally segregated themselves into various groups, probably based on rank, function, and personal relationships built over months or years of service together. She watched the easy camaraderie between the men, the casual conversation that spoke of shared experiences and mutual trust. "Mind if we join you?" Sarah looked up to see 3 Marines standing beside her table, trays in hand. The one who had spoken was a corporal, probably in his mid-20s, with intelligent eyes and a friendly demeanor. Behind him stood 2 other Marines, both younger, who looked uncertain about their companion's decision to approach her. "Please," Sarah gestured to the empty chairs around the table. "I am Sara Martinez." "Dave Kowalski," the corporal replied, settling into a seat across from her. "This is Private Chun and Private Williams." The 2 younger Marines nodded politely, but remained quiet as they began eating. Sarah could sense their discomfort with the situation, the awkwardness of not knowing how to interact with her. "So you're the sniper," Kowalski continued, cutting into his meat with practiced efficiency. "Word travels fast around here. How long have you been in?" "About 2 years," Sarah replied. "Basic training, then infantry school, then sniper school. This is my first real assignment." Kowalski nodded thoughtfully. "Sniper school is no joke. I tried out for it last year, but washed out during the stalking exercises. Takes a special kind of patience to lay in the dirt for 12 hours waiting for one shot." Sarah appreciated his matter-of-fact tone, the way he discussed her training without any hint of condescension or disbelief. "It's definitely not for everyone. But I've always been good at waiting and watching." "What made you want to be a sniper?" Chun asked suddenly, then immediately looked embarrassed at his own question. Sarah considered her answer carefully. The honest response involved Miguel and the promise she had made to herself, but that felt too personal to share with people she had just met. "I like the precision of it," she said finally. "One shot, one target, maximum impact with minimum collateral damage. It requires discipline and skill in a way that appeals to me." Williams, who had been eating in silence, finally spoke up. "Some of the older guys are saying you won't last a week. They think the brass is just playing politics, putting women in combat roles to look good for the media." Chun shot Williams a sharp look, clearly uncomfortable with his bluntness. But Sarah appreciated the honesty, even if the sentiment behind it was frustrating. "I'm not here for politics or media attention," she replied calmly. "I'm here to do a job. If some people want to waste time speculating about my motivations or my capabilities, that's their choice. I'll let my performance speak for itself." Kowalski smiled approvingly. "That's the right attitude. This unit has some good Marines, some of the best I've served with. But they're also protective of their reputation. They've been through hell together, and they're suspicious of anything that might disrupt that bond." "I understand that," Sarah said. "I'm not here to disrupt anything. I'm here to contribute. Just be prepared," Kowalski warned, lowering his voice slightly. "Some of them are going to test you. Hard. They're going to want to see if you break under pressure." Sarah looked around the mess hall, taking in the faces of the Marines who would be her brothers in arms for the next 6 months and beyond. Some avoided her gaze, others stared openly, and a few nodded with what might have been grudging respect. She knew that Kowalski was right about the tests that lay ahead, but she also knew that she had been preparing for these challenges her entire life. "Let them test me," she said quietly. "I didn't come this far to fail now." As the conversation continued around the table, Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and determination settling in her chest. Tomorrow would bring her first full day with the unit, her first chance to show them what she was capable of. The road ahead would be difficult, marked by skepticism, challenges, and the constant pressure to prove herself worthy of the trust that would be placed in her. But as she thought about Miguel and the promise she had made at his graveside, Sarah knew that she was exactly where she belonged. The Marines might have their doubts about her, but she had no doubts about herself. She was a United States Marine, trained and ready to serve. Now all she had to do was prove it. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the barracks at 0530, 30 minutes before the scheduled formation. Sarah had been awake for the past hour, staring at the ceiling and mentally preparing herself for her first full day with Bravo Company. The pre-dawn darkness outside her window was just beginning to give way to the first hints of gray light, and she could hear the stirrings of other Marines beginning their daily routines. Johnson rolled out of his bunk with practiced efficiency, moving through his morning routine with the automatic precision of military habit. Sarah followed suit, ensuring that every aspect of her appearance met the exacting standards of Marine Corps regulation. She checked and double-checked her uniform, knowing that any small flaw would be seized upon as evidence of her inadequacy. As they made their way to the formation area, Sarah noticed the subtle ways that her presence changed the dynamic around her. Conversations quieted as she passed. Groups of Marines shifted their positions to avoid direct interaction, and she caught glimpses of nudges and meaningful looks exchanged between the men. The message was clear. She was being evaluated, judged, and found wanting before she had even had a chance to prove herself. The formation itself was a display of military precision, with Marines falling into perfectly aligned ranks as the sun crested the horizon. Captain Morrison, the company commander, stood at the front of the formation with the bearing of a man who had earned his authority through years of dedicated service. He was in his early 40s, with graying temples and the kind of steady gaze that missed nothing. "Good morning, Marines." Morrison's voice carried easily across the formation area. "Today we begin a new phase of training as we prepare for deployment. I want to remind everyone that we are a team, and teams succeed or fail together." Sarah felt the weight of multiple gazes settling on her as Morrison continued his brief address. She maintained her position at attention, eyes fixed straight ahead, but she was acutely aware that his words about teamwork were directed as much at the men around her as they were at her. After formation, the company broke into smaller groups for various training exercises. Sarah found herself assigned to a marksmanship training session under the direct supervision of Gunnery Sergeant Thompson. As she gathered her gear and made her way to the designated training area, she could hear whispered conversations behind her. $20 says she can't qualify on the range, one voice muttered. "I'll take that bet," another replied. "But I'm betting she quits before we even get to live fire exercises." Sarah forced herself to ignore the commentary, focusing instead on the familiar weight of her rifle and the methodical process of preparing for range time. She had been through countless hours of marksmanship training, and the routine was as natural to her as breathing. But she also knew that this session would be different from any she had experienced before. The rifle range at Camp Pendleton stretched out before them like a concrete and steel testament to military precision. Target stands dotted the landscape at various distances, from the basic qualification ranges at 200 yards to the advanced sniper targets at 800 yards and beyond. The morning air was still and clear, perfect conditions for accurate shooting. Thompson assembled a group of 12 Marines in a loose semicircle near the firing line. Sarah found herself positioned at the edge of the group, neither fully included nor completely isolated. She recognized some of the faces from the mess hall the night before, including a few who had watched her conversation with Kowalski and the others. "Today we're going to run through some basic marksmanship exercises," Thompson announced, his voice carrying the authority of years of experience. "I want to see where everyone stands before we move into more advanced training scenarios." He began calling out assignments, pairing Marines with specific targets, and firing positions. Sarah waited as he worked through the roster, noting that she was being saved for last. When Thompson finally turned his attention to her, his expression carried a mixture of skepticism and challenge. "Martinez, you're going to start at the 500-yard line. Let's see what all that sniper school training taught you." 500 yards was a respectable distance, well beyond the range of basic qualification requirements, but not quite at the extreme distances that separated true snipers from conventional marksmen. Sarah nodded and gathered her equipment, aware that every eye in the group was now focused on her. As she made her way to the designated firing position, Sarah heard Sergeant Davis, one of Thompson's senior NCOs, address the group behind her. "All right, Marines, let's see if our new team member can walk the walk." The comment was delivered in a tone of casual skepticism, but Sarah caught the underlying challenge. This wasn't just a training exercise. It was an evaluation, a test of her worthiness to be considered a member of the team. Sarah settled into her firing position with practiced ease, adjusting her body to achieve the perfect balance of stability and comfort that would allow for precise shot placement. The rifle felt familiar in her hands, its weight and balance as natural as an extension of her own body. She had fired thousands of rounds during her training, and muscle memory guided her through the preliminary setup. Through her scope, the target at 500 yards appeared as a clear silhouette against the sandy backdrop of the range. The wind was minimal, maybe 3 or 4 miles per hour from the left, not enough to significantly affect her shot placement at this distance. Sarah took a moment to regulate her breathing, slowing her heart rate, and clearing her mind of everything except the target in front of her. Behind her, she could hear the other Marines conducting their own exercises, but the sound seemed distant and muted. Her entire focus narrowed to the precise alignment of her crosshairs and the gentle pressure of her finger against the trigger. The first shot broke clean and sharp, the rifle's recoil absorbed smoothly by her well-positioned body. Through the scope, Sarah could see the small puff of dirt that marked where her bullet had struck the target. It was a solid hit, well within the acceptable range for a first shot at that distance. "Not bad, Martinez," Thompson called out, though his tone suggested he was reserving judgment. "Let's see if you can do it again." Sarah worked the bolt of her rifle, chambering another round. The second shot felt even better than the first, the rhythm of breathing and trigger control settling into the familiar pattern that had carried her through sniper school. This shot struck even closer to the center of the target, confirming that her initial adjustments had been correct. 2 for 2, Davis commented to the group. "Let's see if she can keep it up under pressure." Sarah fired 3 more shots in steady succession, each one striking the target within a tight group that would have earned praise from any marksmanship instructor. The Marines behind her had grown quiet, their casual conversation replaced by focused attention on her performance. Thompson walked down to the firing line, using a pair of binoculars to examine her target more closely. When he returned, his expression was carefully neutral, but Sarah caught a hint of surprise in his eyes. 5 shots, all hits, he announced to the group. Average group size about 4 inches at 500 yards. It was a solid performance by any standard, the kind of shooting that marked Sarah as a competent marksman. But she could sense that Thompson wasn't finished with his evaluation. "All right, Martinez, let's step it up. Move back to the 600-yard line." 600 yards was getting into the range where environmental factors became more significant, where small errors in wind reading or range estimation could cause complete misses. Sarah gathered her gear and moved to the new position, aware that the difficulty level had just increased substantially. As she settled into her new firing position, Sarah heard one of the Marines behind her make a quiet comment to his neighbor. "No way she can hit at 600. That's sniper territory." The comment stung, not because she doubted her abilities, but because it revealed the fundamental assumption that she was somehow less capable than her male counterparts. Sarah had faced this skepticism throughout her military career, but it never got easier to hear. The 600-yard target appeared smaller through her scope, requiring more precise adjustments and careful attention to environmental conditions. Sarah spent extra time studying the mirage patterns and vegetation movement that would indicate wind direction and speed. At this distance, a small error in wind calculation could mean the difference between a hit and a miss. Her first shot at the new distance struck slightly low and to the right of center, a result of underestimating the wind drift. Sarah made mental adjustments and fired again, this time achieving a solid center hit that drew a murmur of surprise from the watching Marines. "Lucky shot," someone muttered behind her. Sarah ignored the comment and continued firing, working through the adjustments necessary to consistently hit the distant target. By her 5th shot, she had settled into a rhythm that produced a tight group, well within acceptable parameters for that distance. Thompson examined the target through his binoculars, his expression growing more thoughtful. When he returned to address the group, there was a subtle shift in his tone. 5 for 5 at 600 yards, he announced. That's solid shooting. But rather than moving on to the next Marine, Thompson continued to focus on Sarah. Martinez, how do you feel about moving back to the 700-yard line? 700 yards was definitely sniper territory, the kind of distance where only highly trained marksmen could be expected to achieve consistent results. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach, not because she doubted her training, but because she understood the significance of the challenge being laid down. I'm ready, Gunny, she replied, gathering her equipment once again. As she moved to the 700-yard line, Sarah could hear more whispered conversations behind her. The mood of the group had shifted from casual skepticism to genuine interest. Word was spreading to other Marines in the area, and she could see additional faces gathering to watch her performance. The 700-yard target was barely visible to the naked eye, appearing through her scope as a distant silhouette that shimmered slightly in the heat waves rising from the concrete. At this distance, everything mattered. Wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, even the slight variations in ammunition weight that could affect bullet trajectory. Sarah took her time with the first shot, carefully calculating all the variables that would affect her bullet's flight path. The shot felt good as it broke, but she had to wait several seconds before she could see the impact point through her scope. The bullet struck just slightly high and to the left, a result that indicated her calculations were close, but not perfect. She made minor adjustments and fired again. This time the bullet struck closer to center, confirming her corrections. By the third shot, Sarah had achieved the precise combination of adjustments needed to consistently hit the distant target. The gathering crowd of Marines had grown noticeably larger, and their whispered comments carried a different tone than before. The casual dismissal had been replaced by genuine curiosity and, in some cases, grudging respect. Damn, she heard someone say quietly. Girl can shoot. Sarah completed her string of shots at 700 yards, achieving a group that would have been respectable for any sniper. As she prepared to gather her equipment, Thompson approached her position. Not bad, Martinez, he said, and for the first time, his tone carried a hint of respect. But I'm curious about something. What's the furthest distance you've successfully engaged a target? The question was loaded with implications. Sarah knew that Thompson was pushing her to reveal the limits of her capabilities, testing whether her training matched her confidence. During sniper school, I successfully engaged targets out to 1,000 yards, Sarah replied honestly. Beyond that, I haven't had much opportunity to practice. Thompson nodded thoughtfully, glancing toward the distant target stands that marked the 800, 900, and 1,000-yard lines. The 1,000-yard range was rarely used except for advanced sniper training, and hitting targets at that distance required not just skill, but also ideal conditions and high-quality equipment. Well, Thompson said after a moment of consideration, today might be your lucky day. We happen to have perfect conditions, and I'm curious to see what our new sniper can really do. The challenge was unmistakable, and Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the expanding crowd focused on her. This was no longer a routine training exercise. It had become a test of her worthiness to be considered a true member of the elite marksman community. I'm willing to try, Gunny, Sarah replied, though she felt her pulse quicken with anticipation. As word spread about the impromptu, long-range demonstration, more Marines began gathering around the range. Sarah could see senior NCOs and officers among the crowd, including Captain Morrison, who had apparently been drawn by the unusual activity. The walk to the 1,000-yard firing position felt longer than it actually was, with Sarah acutely aware of the dozens of eyes following her progress. At this distance, the target was barely visible even through her high-powered scope, appearing as a small dark shape against the distant hillside. Sarah spent several minutes studying the environmental conditions, noting the subtle wind patterns and heat signatures that would affect her bullet's flight. At 1,000 yards, even small environmental factors could cause significant deviations in bullet trajectory, and there was no room for error. The first shot was as much about gathering information as achieving a hit. Sarah fired carefully, focusing on perfect form and technique. Through her scope, she watched for the impact, but at this distance, even a near miss might not be visible. No impact observed, Thompson called out after scanning the target area with his spotting scope. Sarah made adjustments based on her calculations and fired again. This time she thought she caught a glimpse of movement near the target, but it was impossible to be certain. Possible hit, low, and right, Thompson reported. With this information, Sarah could make more precise adjustments. The third shot felt perfect as it broke, her breathing and trigger control aligned in the precise coordination that separated good shooting from exceptional shooting. Hit, Thompson called out, his voice carrying across the range. Center mass. A murmur of approval rippled through the gathered crowd. Sarah fired 2 more shots, both of which Thompson confirmed as solid hits. When she finally set down her rifle and looked back at the assembled Marines, the expressions on their faces had changed dramatically. Captain Morrison stepped forward, his face carrying an expression of measured approval. Outstanding shooting, Lance Corporal Martinez. That's some of the finest long-range marksmanship I've seen in my 20 years of service. The praise felt good, but Sarah could see that not everyone in the crowd was convinced. Some faces still carried skepticism, and she caught snippets of conversation that suggested her performance was being attributed to luck rather than skill. 3 hits at 1,000 yards doesn't make her a sniper, one voice said quietly. Probably just got lucky with the wind, another added. Thompson seemed to sense the continuing doubt in the crowd. He turned to address the assembled Marines, his voice carrying clearly across the range. I know some of you still have questions about Martinez's capabilities, he said bluntly. So let me make this interesting. Anyone here think they can match what she just did? The challenge hung in the air for a moment before Sergeant Davis stepped forward. Davis was known throughout the company as an excellent marksman, having earned his position as one of Thompson's senior NCOs partly through his shooting ability. I'll give it a try, Gunny, Davis said, gathering his own rifle. What followed was a respectful but intense competition between 2 skilled marksmen. Davis was clearly an accomplished shooter, achieving several hits at the 700 and 800-yard lines. But when he moved back to the 1,000-yard position, his shots began to fall short of Sarah's performance. 2 more Marines tried their hand at the long-range targets, each achieving respectable results, but falling short of the consistency Sarah had demonstrated. By the time the impromptu competition concluded, it was clear that her performance had not been a matter of luck. As the crowd began to disperse and the Marines returned to their regular training schedules, Sarah found herself approached by several individuals who had watched her shooting. Some offered congratulations, others asked technical questions about her techniques, and a few simply nodded with what appeared to be newfound respect. Kowalski, the corporal who had sat with her at dinner the night before, appeared at her side as she gathered her equipment. That was impressive shooting, he said with genuine admiration. I think you just changed some minds out there. Sarah looked around at the dispersing crowd, noting the different expressions and body language of the Marines who had witnessed her performance. Some still appeared skeptical, but the open hostility she had sensed earlier seemed to have diminished. It's a start, she replied, slinging her rifle across her shoulder. But I know it's going to take more than one good day on the range to earn their trust. Kowalski nodded thoughtfully. You're right about that. But what you did today was important. You showed them that you belong here, that you can do the job they're asking you to do. As they walked back toward the barracks, Sarah reflected on the events of the morning. The impromptu shooting demonstration had been both exhilarating and exhausting, requiring her to perform at her absolute best under the most challenging circumstances. But more than that, it had been her first real opportunity to show her new unit what she was capable of. She knew that this was just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and undoubtedly new tests of her resolve. But for the first time since arriving at Camp Pendleton, Sarah felt like she had taken a genuine step toward earning her place among these Marines. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but she was ready to walk it. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's demonstration on the rifle range, and the dynamic within Bravo Company had shifted in subtle but meaningful ways. While not everyone had fully embraced her presence, the open hostility had diminished, replaced by a cautious professional respect. Marines who had previously ignored her now included her in tactical discussions, and some of the younger enlisted men had begun asking her for shooting advice. However, Sarah knew that her real test was still to come. Range shooting, no matter how impressive, was only one component of being an effective military sniper. The announcement that came during morning formation would provide the ultimate evaluation of her skills and her place within the unit. Listen up, Marines. Captain Morrison's voice carried across the formation area with its usual authority. We're going to conduct a 3-day field exercise starting tomorrow. This will be a comprehensive evaluation of your tactical skills, field craft, and ability to operate as a cohesive unit. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as Morrison continued outlining the exercise parameters. This would be her first extended field operation with Bravo Company, the kind of realistic training scenario that would test every aspect of her military training. The exercise will simulate combat conditions in Afghanistan. Morrison continued. You'll be operating in teams of 4 to 6 Marines, conducting reconnaissance missions, target acquisition, and simulated combat operations. Each team will be evaluated on mission completion, tactical proficiency, and unit cohesion. After formation, the Marines gathered in smaller groups to receive their specific assignments. Sarah found herself assigned to Alpha Team under the leadership of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the instructor who had welcomed her to Camp Pendleton. The team included Corporal Kowalski, Private Johnson, and Private Shun, along with a combat engineer named Corporal Williams. Rodriguez gathered his team in a quiet corner of the barracks to discuss the upcoming exercise. His manner was professional and inclusive, treating Sarah as an integral member of the team rather than an add-on whose capabilities were still in question. Our primary mission is reconnaissance, Rodriguez explained, spreading a topographical map across the table. We'll be inserted here, about 12 clicks from our primary objective. Intelligence suggests enemy activity in this valley, and Command wants eyes-on confirmation of numbers and disposition. Sarah studied the map carefully, noting the terrain features and potential routes of approach. The target area was situated in a natural bowl surrounded by hills, offering multiple observation points, but also numerous challenges for concealment and extraction. What's our timeline? Kowalski asked, tracing possible routes with his finger. 72 hours total, Rodriguez replied. Insertion tomorrow at 0400 with mission completion and extraction by Thursday evening. We'll have to maintain radio silence, except for emergency communications or mission-critical intelligence. Sarah felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and nervousness that preceded any significant operation. This exercise would test every skill she had learned during her military training, from basic fieldcraft to advanced marksmanship under realistic conditions. Martinez, Rodriguez turned his attention to her. You'll be our primary shooter. If we encounter targets of opportunity, you'll be responsible for engagement decisions and execution. Are you comfortable with that level of responsibility? The question carried weight beyond its surface meaning. Rodriguez was asking whether she felt ready to make life and death decisions in a combat environment, even a simulated one. It was a level of trust that had to be earned, and Sarah understood the significance of being offered that role. Absolutely, Staff Sergeant. I'm ready for whatever the mission requires. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Good. Kowalski will be your spotter, Johnson and Jim will handle security and communications, and Williams will cover our 6 and handle any demolition requirements. The rest of the day was spent in detailed mission planning, equipment preparation, and final rehearsals of tactical procedures. Sarah found herself fully integrated into the planning process, her input valued, and incorporated into the team's overall strategy. It was a marked contrast to her first few days with the unit, when many Marines had seemed reluctant to acknowledge her presence. That evening, as Sarah performed final checks on her equipment, she was approached by Gunnery Sergeant Thompson. His relationship with her had evolved significantly since their first confrontation, though it remained professional rather than friendly. Martinez, he said, settling down on the bunk across from her, I wanted to talk to you before tomorrow's exercise. Sarah looked up from her gear, noting the serious expression on Thompson's face. Of course, Gunny. What's on your mind? Thompson was quiet for a moment, apparently choosing his words carefully. I'll be honest with you. When you first arrived, I didn't think you belonged here. I thought the brass was playing politics, putting women in combat roles without considering the consequences. Sarah remained silent, sensing that Thompson had more to say. But watching you on the range, seeing how you handle yourself, I'm starting to think I might have been wrong. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. Tomorrow's exercise is going to be different from anything you've experienced before. It's not just about shooting accuracy or following orders. It's about making decisions under pressure, about earning the trust of the Marines around you. Understand that, Gunny. I'm prepared for the challenge. Thompson nodded slowly. I believe you are, but I want you to know that some people are still watching, still waiting for you to fail. There are Marines in this company who think tomorrow's exercise will prove that women don't belong in combat units. The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a familiar burden. She had carried this pressure throughout her military career, the constant awareness that her performance was being evaluated not just as an individual, but as a representative of all women who might follow in her footsteps. What are you telling me, Gunny? I'm telling you that tomorrow isn't just about completing a mission. It's about proving that you deserve to be here, that you can be counted on when things get difficult. Thompson stood up, preparing to leave. And I'm also telling you that I hope you succeed. This unit needs good Marines, regardless of gender. The next morning arrived cold and gray, with a pre-dawn mist that would provide excellent concealment for the team's insertion. Sarah moved through her pre-mission routine with practiced efficiency, checking and rechecking every piece of equipment that she would carry into the field. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, with Alpha Team being deposited in a small clearing about 2 kilometers from their planned route to the objective area. As the aircraft departed, the silence of the wilderness settled around them, broken only by the distant sounds of other teams beginning their own missions. Rodriguez led the team through a careful movement to their initial observation point, a rocky outcropping that provided excellent visibility of the target valley while offering good concealment from potential enemy observation. The movement took nearly 4 hours, as the team carefully avoided detection by the opposing force that would be operating in the area. Sarah found herself settling into the rhythm of field operations, the careful balance of movement and concealment that marked professional military units. Her teammates moved with quiet efficiency, communicating through hand signals and whispered commands that demonstrated months of training and shared experience. When they reached their primary observation post, Sarah established her shooting position while Kowalski set up his spotting scope. The target valley spread out below them, a natural amphitheater that would channel any enemy movement into predictable corridors. "Good sight lines," Kowalski whispered, adjusting his scope to scan the valley floor. "If anything moves down there, we'll see it." Sarah settled behind her rifle, adjusting her position to achieve maximum stability and comfort for what might be a long period of observation. Through her scope, she could see several structures in the valley that matched the intelligence descriptions they had received during their briefing. The first day of the exercise passed quietly, with the team maintaining constant observation while rotating duties to ensure that someone was always watching the target area. Sarah found herself falling into the meditative state that characterized long-range surveillance. Her attention focused but relaxed, ready to shift instantly to full alertness if the situation required it. Late in the afternoon, their patience was rewarded when a group of opposing force members appeared in the valley. Through her scope, Sarah could see 6 individuals moving carefully between the buildings, obviously conducting some kind of reconnaissance of their own. "I count 6 personnel," she whispered to Kowalski, who was recording their observations for later transmission. "Approximately 800 meters, moving between buildings 2 and 3. Kowalski confirmed her count and began plotting the exact positions of the observed enemy forces. This information would be crucial for the overall exercise evaluation, demonstrating the team's ability to gather accurate intelligence under realistic conditions. As the exercise progressed into the second day, Sarah found herself increasingly integrated into the team's decision-making process. When Rodriguez needed to make tactical decisions about movement routes or observation priorities, he consistently sought her input and incorporated her recommendations into the team's actions. The second night brought the kind of challenge that separated professional military units from amateur enthusiasts. A severe thunderstorm moved through the area, bringing driving rain and near-zero visibility. The team was forced to maintain their observation duties while dealing with equipment that was soaked, radios that barely functioned, and visibility that made accurate surveillance nearly impossible. Sarah spent hours lying in the mud behind her rifle, water streaming off her helmet and equipment while she maintained her watch over the target area. It was miserable, exhausting work, but it was also exactly the kind of challenge that military training was designed to prepare her for. During the worst of the storm, Johnson approached her position to check on her status. "You doing okay, Martinez?" he whispered, settling down beside her in the mud. "I'm fine," Sarah replied, though she was shivering from the cold and thoroughly soaked despite her rain gear. "Just another day at the office." Johnson grinned at her response. When you first arrived, some of the guys were betting on how long you'd last. Nobody bet on you making it through something like this. And now, Johnson looked out at the storm-lashed valley below them. Now I think they're starting to realize that they might have underestimated you. The third day of the exercise brought clear skies and the kind of crisp visibility that snipers dream about. Sarah found herself presented with a complex tactical scenario when opposing force members began moving through the valley in patterns that suggested they were preparing for some kind of operation. "I'm seeing increased activity," she reported to Rodriguez, who was monitoring communications from their command post. "Multiple personnel moving between buildings. Looks like they're setting up some kind of defensive position." Rodriguez studied the intelligence they had gathered over the previous 2 days, comparing current observations with previous patterns of activity. This could be what command is looking for. If they're establishing a defensive position, it might indicate a permanent presence in the area. The decision was made to call for artillery simulation on the target area, a complex process that required precise target identification and coordination with supporting units. Sarah found herself responsible for providing exact target coordinates and damage assessments, a role that placed her at the center of the team's most critical mission. As she carefully plotted the positions of the enemy forces, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility that came with being the primary shooter. In a real combat situation, her accuracy could mean the difference between mission success and failure, between her teammates going home safely or not going home at all. The artillery simulation went perfectly, with Sarah's target coordinates proving accurate enough to achieve simulated destruction of the enemy positions. As the exercise concluded and the team prepared for extraction, Rodriguez approached her with an expression of obvious satisfaction. "Outstanding work, Martinez. Your target identification and coordination were exactly what this mission required." But the real validation came from her teammates, who had spent the last 72 hours working closely with her under challenging conditions. As they gathered their equipment and prepared for helicopter pickup, Kowalski voiced what the entire team was thinking. He said, adjusting his gear for the extraction, "I've been through a lot of exercises with a lot of different Marines. But I've never worked with a sniper who was more professional or more reliable than you've been this week." Chun and Johnson nodded in agreement, and even Williams, who had been among the more skeptical Marines when Sarah first arrived, offered his respect. "I owe you an apology," Williams said quietly. "I didn't think you belonged here, and I was wrong. You've earned your place on this team." As the helicopter approached their extraction point, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment that went beyond the successful completion of the exercise. Over the past 3 days, she had proven herself not just as a capable sniper, but as a reliable team member who could be counted on under the most challenging circumstances. But more than that, she had taken a crucial step toward earning the respect and trust of her fellow Marines. The skepticism and hostility that had greeted her arrival had been replaced by professional respect and, in some cases, genuine admiration for her skills and dedication. The exercise had been a watershed moment, a clear demonstration that her presence in the unit was not a political statement or an experiment, but a valuable addition to their combat capabilities. As the helicopter lifted off and carried Alpha Team back to Camp Pendleton, Sarah knew that she had crossed an important threshold in her military career. The road ahead would still present challenges, but she was no longer walking it alone. She had earned her place among the Marines of Bravo Company, and that recognition would sustain her through whatever trials lay ahead. 2 months had passed since the successful field exercise, and Sarah had settled into a comfortable routine with Bravo Company. The initial skepticism and hostility had largely evaporated, replaced by the kind of professional camaraderie that marked elite military units. She had proven herself in training exercises, earned the respect of her peers, and gained the confidence of her superiors. But as their deployment to Afghanistan approached, Sarah was about to face the ultimate test of her skills and resolve. The announcement came during a routine briefing on a Thursday afternoon in late September. Captain Morrison stood before the assembled company with the bearing of a man delivering news of significant importance. The room fell silent as Marines sensed the gravity of what was about to be discussed. "Marines, I've just received word from Battalion Command. Our deployment timeline has been moved up. We'll be wheels up for Afghanistan in 6 weeks instead of the originally planned 12 weeks. A murmur of surprise and concern rippled through the assembled Marines. 6 weeks was barely enough time to complete their pre-deployment training and preparation, let alone address any deficiencies that might have been identified in their recent exercises. I know this is short notice, Morrison continued, but intelligence indicates increased insurgent activity in our assigned area of operations. Command wants us on the ground as soon as possible to support ongoing operations. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as the reality of their situation sank in. Afghanistan was no longer an abstract destination months in the future. It was a rapidly approaching reality that would test everything she had learned and trained for over the past year. After the briefing, Gunnery Sergeant Thompson approached her with a serious expression. Over the months, their relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect, though Thompson remained demanding and direct in his evaluation of her performance. "Martinez, I need to talk to you privately," he said, gesturing toward a quiet corner of the building. Sarah followed him, noting the unusual gravity in his demeanor. Thompson was typically straightforward in his communications, but today he seemed to be carrying the weight of something significant. "I just got off a conference call with Battalion Intelligence," Thompson began without preamble. "They've been monitoring insurgent activity in our assigned sector, and the situation is more complex than we initially thought." Sarah waited for him to continue, sensing that he was building towards something important. "There's been increased sniper activity targeting American patrols," Thompson continued. "Intelligence believes there's at least one highly skilled enemy sniper operating in the area, someone with advanced training and equipment. Several of our people have been killed or wounded by precise, long-range shots." The implications of his words were clear, and Sarah felt a chill of anticipation mixed with apprehension. This would not be a deployment where her primary role would be reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. She was being prepared for the possibility of engaging in sniper versus sniper combat, the most challenging and dangerous aspect of her profession. "Command specifically requested that we bring our best sniper on this deployment," Thompson said, meeting her eyes directly. "They're counting on you to counter this threat." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. Throughout her training and preparation, she had known intellectually that her role might eventually involve taking human lives. But the abstract concept was now becoming a concrete reality that she would have to face in a matter of weeks. "I understand, Gunny. I'm ready for whatever the mission requires." Thompson studied her face carefully, apparently evaluating her response. "Are you? Because what I'm talking about isn't just about marksmanship skills or tactical knowledge. I'm talking about the ability to take another human being's life and continue functioning as a professional soldier." It was a question that Sarah had asked herself countless times during her training, and one that could only be truly answered in the moment of crisis itself. But she had committed herself to this path years ago, standing at Miguel's graveside and making a promise that she intended to keep regardless of the cost. "I joined the Marines to defend my country and my fellow Marines," she replied steadily. "If that means engaging enemy snipers, then that's what I'll do." Thompson nodded slowly. "I believe you will. But I want you to understand that what you'll be facing in Afghanistan is different from anything you've experienced in training. The enemy sniper operating in our sector has killed at least 6 Americans in the past 3 months. He's skilled, experienced, and completely committed to his cause." The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of intensive preparation and training. Sarah found herself working longer hours than ever before, honing her skills on the rifle range and studying intelligence reports about enemy tactics and capabilities. The knowledge that she would soon be facing a skilled enemy sniper added urgency to every training session and mission rehearsal. During this period, her relationship with her fellow Marines deepened in ways that she hadn't expected. The knowledge that they would soon be facing real combat together created bonds that transcended the initial skepticism about her presence in the unit. Marines who had once viewed her as an outsider now included her in the tight-knit brotherhood that sustained them through the challenges of military life. Kowalski, who had become her regular spotter and close friend, approached her one evening as she cleaned her rifle after a long day on the range. "You nervous about the deployment?" he asked, settling down beside her in the armory. Sarah considered the question carefully. Nervousness wasn't exactly the right word for what she was feeling. It was more like a heightened state of anticipation, a recognition that she was about to face the ultimate test of everything she had worked toward. "I'm ready," she said finally. "I've trained for this my whole military career. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about what it's going to be like when the bullets are real." Kowalski nodded thoughtfully. "I've been on 2 deployments, and I can tell you that nothing really prepares you for that first time when someone's trying to kill you. But I've also learned that the training kicks in when you need it most. You've got the skills, Martinez. Trust them." 2 weeks before their departure, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been transferred to another unit several months earlier, appeared in the barracks with a package under his arm. "Martinez, good to see you again," he said, extending his hand with a warm smile. "I heard about your upcoming deployment, and wanted to give you something before you left." Sarah accepted the package, noting its weight and the careful way Rodriguez had wrapped it. "What is this, Staff Sergeant?" "Open it and find out." Inside the package was a custom-built rifle scope, a piece of equipment that represented thousands of dollars and months of specialized manufacturing. Sarah recognized it immediately as one of the most advanced optics available to military snipers, far superior to the standard-issue equipment she had been using. "Staff Sergeant, I can't accept this. It's too expensive." Rodriguez waved away her objection. "It belonged to my brother. He was a Marine sniper who was killed in Iraq 5 years ago. The scope has been sitting in storage ever since, and I think he would have wanted it to be used by someone who could appreciate its capabilities." Sarah felt the emotional weight of the gift, understanding that Rodriguez was entrusting her with something that carried deep personal significance. The scope represented not just advanced equipment, but a connection to the brotherhood of snipers who had served before her. "I'll take good care of it," she said quietly, "and I'll make sure it serves the mission well." Rodriguez smiled. "I know you will. And Martinez, good luck over there. Come home safe." The final week before deployment was marked by last-minute equipment checks, administrative processing, and the kind of nervous energy that characterized military units preparing for combat. Sarah found herself spending extra time at the rifle range, not because her skills needed improvement, but because the familiar routine of marksmanship practice helped calm her mind and prepare her psychologically for what lay ahead. On her last night before deployment, Sarah sat alone in the barracks, writing a letter to her parents. It was a tradition she had maintained since joining the Marines, but this letter carried special weight because she knew it might be the last communication they received from her for months. As she wrote about her training, her confidence in her abilities, and her commitment to serving her country with honor, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 years ago, she had been a civilian with a dream of military service. 2 years ago, she had been a raw recruit struggling through basic training. 1 year ago, she had been a sniper school student learning the fundamentals of her profession. Now she was a United States Marine, trained and ready to deploy to a combat zone where her skills would be tested under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The skepticism and hostility that had greeted her arrival at Camp Pendleton seemed like ancient history, replaced by the respect and trust of Marines who had come to value her as an equal member of their brotherhood. The next morning, Bravo Company assembled in full combat gear for their departure to Afghanistan. As Sarah stood in formation with her rifle slung across her shoulder and her equipment packed for deployment, she felt a profound sense of purpose and readiness. Captain Morrison addressed the company one final time before their departure, his words carrying the weight of months of training and preparation. "Marines, today we deploy to Afghanistan to continue the fight against terrorism and to support our fellow service members already in theater. You have trained hard, you are well prepared, and you are ready for whatever challenges await us." He paused, scanning the faces of the Marines under his command. "Remember that you are United States Marines, and Marines never leave their fellow Marines behind. Watch out for each other, trust your training, and complete your mission with honor." As the company moved toward the waiting aircraft that would carry them across the world to their combat assignment, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and determination that had sustained her throughout her military career. She was ready to face whatever challenges awaited them in Afghanistan, confident in her training and committed to serving with the same honor and dedication that had characterized her journey from civilian to Marine sniper. The aircraft engines roared to life, carrying Bravo Company toward their deployment and toward the ultimate test of Sarah's skills and resolve. In the weeks ahead, she would face challenges that would test every aspect of her training and character. But as the aircraft lifted off from American soil and began its journey across the Atlantic, Sarah was ready to meet those challenges with the confidence and determination of a United States Marine. The war was waiting, and she was prepared to answer its call. The forward operating base Dalaram in Afghanistan's Helmand province was a stark landscape of concrete barriers, razor wire, and prefabricated buildings scattered across a desert that stretched endlessly toward distant mountains. Sarah had been in country for 3 months, and the initial adjustment to combat operations had been both challenging and transformative. The theoretical knowledge gained during training had been replaced by the hard-earned wisdom that came from operating in a real combat environment. During her first weeks in Afghanistan, Sarah had participated in numerous patrols and reconnaissance missions, gradually acclimating to the rhythm of combat operations. The enemy sniper that intelligence had warned them about remained an elusive threat, responsible for several more casualties, but always managing to evade counter-sniper efforts. Sarah had been positioned during several incidents, but the enemy had proven too skilled to be easily located and engaged. On a scorching Tuesday morning in November, Sarah received the call that would define her deployment and her career as a Marine sniper. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's replacement, Sergeant Major Williams, approached her position in the Tactical Operations Center with the urgent demeanor of someone carrying critical information. "Martinez, we've got a situation developing," Williams said without preamble. "Alpha Company is conducting a patrol in Sector 7, and they've taken sniper fire. 2 Marines wounded, 1 critically. The shooter is positioned somewhere in the hills overlooking the valley, and he's got them pinned down." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she absorbed the information. This was the scenario she had trained for, the moment when all of her preparation would be put to the ultimate test. "What's the situation with the wounded?" "Corpsman is working on them, but they need immediate evacuation. The problem is that the helicopter can't get in with that sniper covering the landing zone. We need you to neutralize the threat." Williams spread a tactical map across the table, pointing to the area where Alpha Company was trapped. The terrain was challenging, with multiple potential firing positions for an enemy sniper and limited approaches for a counter-sniper team. "Intelligence suggests this is the same shooter who's been operating in this area for months," Williams continued. "He's skilled, patient, and he knows the terrain better than we do. This won't be easy." Sarah studied the map carefully, noting the elevation changes and sight lines that would be available to both her and her target. The distance from the nearest suitable firing position to the area where the enemy sniper was likely located would be approximately 1,200 meters, well within her capabilities, but challenging enough to require perfect execution. "I'll need Kowalski as my spotter and a security team to cover our approach," Sarah said, her mind already working through the tactical requirements of the mission. "Already arranged. Kowalski is gearing up, and Sergeant Davis will lead a 4-man security team. Your helicopter departs in 15 minutes. The flight to the insertion point took 20 minutes, during which Sarah performed final checks on her equipment and reviewed the intelligence gathered about the enemy sniper's previous activities. The pattern of his attacks suggested someone with advanced training and excellent fieldcraft, capable of engaging targets at long range and then melting away before counter-sniper teams could respond. As the helicopter approached the insertion point, Sarah could hear radio traffic from Alpha Company describing their situation. The wounded Marines were stable, but needed evacuation urgently, and the enemy sniper was maintaining his position, preventing any movement in the valley below. "This is Alpha 6, came the voice of Alpha Company's commander over the radio. "Sniper is still active. We've identified muzzle flash from grid reference 841629, elevation approximately 800 meters. Be advised, this guy is good. He's taken 3 shots and hit 2 Marines at ranges exceeding 600 meters. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris, and Sarah's team immediately moved toward their planned firing position. The approach required careful movement across open terrain that was potentially observed by the enemy sniper, adding urgency to their tactical situation. Sarah found herself drawing on months of training and combat experience as she led her team toward the optimal firing position. The weight of responsibility was enormous. 2 Marines' lives depended on her ability to locate and neutralize a skilled enemy sniper who had already proven his capabilities. The climb to their firing position took 40 minutes, with the team moving carefully to avoid detection while maintaining speed sufficient to reach their destination before the tactical situation deteriorated further. As they approached the ridge line that would provide Sarah with a clear sight line to the enemy's suspected position, she could hear continued radio traffic indicating that Alpha Company remained pinned down. Kowalski established his spotting position first, using his high-powered optics to scan the opposite hillside for signs of the enemy sniper. The terrain was a maze of rocks, vegetation, and natural concealment that would challenge even the most experienced observer to locate a well-hidden shooter. Sarah settled into her firing position with practiced efficiency, adjusting her equipment and position to achieve maximum stability and accuracy. Through her scope, the custom optic that Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had given her before deployment, she began a systematic scan of the area where intelligence suggested the enemy sniper was positioned. "I'm not seeing anything obvious," Kowalski whispered, continuing his careful observation of the target area. "This guy knows how to hide." Sarah was not surprised by the difficulty in locating their target. A skilled sniper in prepared positions with good camouflage could remain virtually invisible even to experienced observers. But she also knew that eventually the enemy would have to reveal himself if he intended to continue engaging Alpha Company. They waited with the patience that marked professional snipers, maintaining constant observation while remaining ready to engage instantly if the opportunity presented itself. Sarah controlled her breathing and heart rate, entering the meditative state that allowed for precise shooting under pressure. 20 minutes into their observation, the enemy sniper made his mistake. A flash of movement, barely perceptible to the naked eye, caught Sarah's attention through her scope. At first, she wasn't certain she had seen anything at all, but Kowalski confirmed her observation. "I saw it too," he whispered. "About 200 meters left of the large boulder, maybe 50 meters up the slope." Sarah adjusted her scope to focus on the area Kowalski had indicated, studying the terrain for any additional signs of the enemy's presence. The position was well chosen, offering excellent sight lines to the valley below, while providing natural concealment from observation. "Range to target?" Sarah asked quietly. Kowalski worked with his range-finding equipment, taking into account the elevation difference and atmospheric conditions. 1,247 meters. Wind is approximately 8 miles per hour, left to right. Temperature is 95 degrees, humidity low. Sarah made the necessary adjustments to her scope and firing position, compensating for the environmental factors that would affect her bullet's trajectory. At this distance, precision was critical. A small error in calculation or execution could mean the difference between success and failure. "Alpha 6, this is Overwatch," Sarah transmitted over the radio, using the call sign assigned to her team. "We have possible target identification at grid 841630. Preparing to engage." "Copy, Overwatch. Alpha Company is standing by for your shot." Sarah settled into her final firing position, controlling her breathing as she achieved perfect sight alignment. Through her scope, she could now clearly see the outline of the enemy sniper's position, partially concealed by rocks and vegetation, but visible enough to provide a target. The shot had to be perfect. At 1,247 meters, with wounded Marines depending on her accuracy, there was no margin for error. Sarah felt the familiar calm that descended over her during moments of extreme focus, her entire world narrowing to the precise alignment of her crosshairs and the gentle pressure of her finger against the trigger. The rifle fired with sharp crack that echoed across the valley. Through her scope, Sarah watched as her bullet struck exactly where she had aimed, hitting the enemy sniper with devastating effect. The threat that had terrorized American forces for months was neutralized with a single, precisely placed shot. "Target down," Kowalski confirmed, continuing to observe through his spotting scope. No movement, no return fire. Sarah maintained her position for several more minutes, scanning for any additional threats or signs that the neutralized sniper had been operating with support. The valley below remained quiet except for the sounds of Alpha Company beginning to move their wounded Marines toward the evacuation landing zone. "Overwatch, this is Alpha 6, came the voice over the radio. "Outstanding shot. The landing zone is clear, and we're moving our wounded to the extraction point. You just saved 2 Marines' lives." As the helicopter arrived to evacuate the wounded Marines, Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. Relief that the threat had been eliminated and that American lives had been saved was mixed with the sobering reality that she had just taken a human life. The enemy sniper had been a skilled adversary, probably someone with his own family and motivations, but he had chosen to target American servicemen and had paid the ultimate price for that decision. Kowalski looked at her with an expression of professional admiration and personal respect. That was an incredible shot, Martinez. 1,247 meters, first round hit under combat conditions. That's the kind of shooting that legends are made of. Sarah nodded quietly, already beginning the process of coming to terms with what she had just accomplished. The technical aspects of a shot had been challenging, but well within her capabilities. The psychological impact of taking a human life would require more time and reflection to fully process. As their team prepared for extraction, Sarah received a radio call from Captain Morrison, who had been monitoring the situation from the Tactical Operations Center. "Martinez, this is 6 Actual. Outstanding work out there. Your shot eliminated a threat that has been plaguing American forces in this sector for months. I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star Medal for your actions today." The recognition felt good, but Sarah knew that the real reward was the knowledge that 2 Marines who might have died were now receiving medical treatment and would eventually return home to their families. That was the ultimate measure of success for any sniper. Not the difficulty of the shot or the recognition received afterward, but the lives saved and the mission accomplished. During the helicopter flight back to base, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, she had faced skepticism and hostility from Marines who questioned her right to be among them. Today, those same Marines were congratulating her on a shot that had saved American lives and eliminated a significant threat. But more than that, she had proven to herself that she could perform under the ultimate pressure. The question that had haunted her throughout her training, whether she could take a human life in combat, had been answered definitively. She could, and she would continue to do so whenever the mission required it. As the helicopter approached forward operating Base Delarum, Sarah could see Marines gathered on the landing zone, waiting to welcome her team home. Word of her successful engagement had already spread throughout the base, and she knew that her status within the unit had been permanently altered by the events of the day. Gunnery Sergeant Thompson was among the Marines waiting for her return, and his expression carried a mixture of professional pride and personal satisfaction. As Sarah stepped off the helicopter, he approached her with the bearing of a senior NCO addressing a Marine who had distinguished herself in combat. "Martinez," he said, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "That was some of the finest sniper work I've witnessed in 20 years of service. You've earned your place among the elite of this profession." The praise meant more to Sarah than Thompson probably realized. His initial skepticism about her capabilities had been one of the significant challenges she had faced when first joining Bravo Company. His recognition now represented a complete transformation in their relationship, from doubt to absolute confidence in her abilities. That evening, as Sarah cleaned her rifle and prepared her equipment for future operations, she thought about the letter she would write to her parents. They would want to know about her experiences in Afghanistan, but she knew that she could never fully describe the complexity of what she had experienced today. She had proven herself as a sniper, earned the respect of her fellow Marines, and saved American lives through her actions. But she had also taken a human life, crossing a threshold that would mark her forever as a combat veteran. The weight of that responsibility was something she would carry for the rest of her life, balanced against the knowledge that her actions had prevented greater loss of American lives. As she finished her equipment maintenance and prepared for sleep, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment and belonging. The skepticism that had greeted her arrival in the Marine Corps seemed like ancient history now, replaced by the absolute confidence of Marines who had seen her perform under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. She was no longer the untested female Marine who had arrived at Camp Pendleton facing doubt and hostility. She was Lance Corporal Sarah Martinez, United States Marine Corps sniper, combat veteran, and a warrior who had proven her worth when it mattered most. The impossible shot that had silenced her critics and saved her fellow Marines would become the stuff of legend within Bravo Company and beyond. But for Sarah, it represented something more fundamental. The completion of a journey that had begun at her brother's graveside and culminated in the fulfillment of a promise she had made to herself and to his memory. She had earned her place among the warriors, and No one would ever question her right to be there again.